This is the second to the last chapter that we will be discussing this semester. Today I'm going to explain a new word called demography, and I'm going to talk about human population trends, and I'm going to introduce urbanization and environmental concerns. So demography then is the study of human populations. Sociologists study the number of people that are living in a given area, and it actually includes fertility, which is the number of children that are being born. It also includes mortality, which is the number of people that are dying in a population, and it includes migration. So, migration is the voluntary or involuntary movement of people. So, for example, I received a job offer to go to New York. So, I voluntarily decide to go to New York because I'm going to make a higher wage. And so that's voluntary migration. Now, there is involuntary migration. For example, when Hurricane Katrina hit the coast of Louisiana, there were people that were forced to migrate because of that environmental event. So, coming to demographic theories, the world population tended to grow very slowly. So, historically, human beings grew at a slow rate because as people were being born, people were also dying. However, there was a point in history where people no longer died, and so we started having a sharp increase in the number of human beings living on the planet. This has led to some people wondering about the carrying capacity of the planet, which basically means will we reach a limit to where the planet will not be able to sustain human populations? Now, there are optimistic and pessimistic theories about humans and our capacity to live on this planet. The pessimistic belief system says that as populations are growing, the Earth's ability to sustain us humans is being threatened. And if we are not able to have the food that we need, the water that we need, the clean air that we need, that it could lead to a complete environmental collapse for human societies. Now, the optimistic point of view basically says that humans can, although we are facing challenges in the environment, that human ingenuity can help resolve those environmental issues, and that we may actually have technology that we create for the future that may be able to help us. This chart is actually a very important chart to help us understand the impact that we Homo sapiens have had in our environment. It took all of human history to produce the 1 billion Homo sapien roaming around on this planet. And if you look in 1930, it was only a short 130 years later where we actually reproduced to be 2 billion human beings. And the time has gotten shorter and shorter to where now at present time we have 7.7 billion human beings living on this planet. And so our overpopulation, just like poverty, will impact certain members of our planetary community. And in research has shown that women are the ones that tend to bear the burden of overpopulation because they are forced to have children that they may not want in certain societies. So, for example, there may be certain cultures where there is no access to birth control, where maybe the culture says that they have to reproduce as much as possible because maybe a deity says that they have to reproduce. And so, if women are not able to control how much they're able to reproduce, they will bear the worst burden of overpopulation, and so will their children. Now, we tend to believe that overpopulation then is a concern of low income nations who have continue to have children. However, part of the a belief system is that we high income nations actually have a bigger footprint, a bigger impact on our environment than certain low income nations. And so, how does urbanization then relate to populations? Well, historically, human beings used to live in small communities. We were not very numerous, so we used to live in small clans or small communities. But then, as we continue to reproduce, we started to then start living with each other and started to form bigger and bigger communities. So urbanization is the study of people who are 100,000 or more. In San Antonio, we basically have over a million. And so urbanization is that structure of people coming together in great numbers. Now, since the 1950s, we've had what's called suburban sprawl. And usually, contractors would say that it has to do with the development of an area, whereas in the opposite point of view is that it's actually contributing to the environmental degradation of communities. So, for example, when you have people wanting to live in areas outside of the inner city, for example, you first have to cut down the trees. You have to be able to then pave, to be able to put drainage for sewers. Then you basically pave it. You put the houses, you put the schools, the businesses, and little by little, then the plants that used to live there are basically taken away or cut down, and so that changes the complete environment of that area. Now, there are some communities that are called exurbs, where these are very extremely wealthy individuals who don't want to live with middle class individuals or with working class individuals. And so they go even further outside of these communities. White flight is the process of economically secure white people leaving inner cities to go live in suburban areas. And the pattern of African Americans and Latinos who are actually economically secure is the same. So you have through city politics and policies individuals who live outside of the inner cities. However, now through policies we have a new process that's called gentrification. This is where members of the middle class are encouraged to come back into areas where lower income individuals have historically lived. And what's happening here is that as the prices of property goes up higher, people who have been living in these communities for 50 or 100 years find that they can no longer afford to live in their homes because the prices are so high, and so they're being displaced. So then how does this impact of population and humans have to do, or how is it connected to the environment? Well, environmental sociology then is the study of how humans interact with their world. And when we're talking about the natural world, it has to do with the Earth's surface, the atmosphere, all living organisms. And for some people, it may feel uncomfortable to hear that we are considered a living organism. And so it's the interactions of us human beings to everything else in our environment and all the resources that are necessary to sustain life. Now, we have a bias towards believing that humans are at the top of the food chain, and sometimes we may not necessarily care about other types of life that are not being able to survive, that are not sustained by the changes in the environment. So it brings us then to pollution, which is contaminants that are introduced into the environment at levels that are damaging. And so all species tend to produce different levels of contaminants. However, the human species is now the species that is impacting the environment in very profound ways. And we'll find out about this, how profound this is when we talk about the other slides. There are certain areas in the planet that are considered brown zones or dead zones. In the United States, we have some dead zones, and I will introduce a concept here called environmental racism. In the United States, we have exploded our nuclear weapons in reservations that were where indigenous people live. And because of this, there have been some areas that are considered basically dead, that are very dangerous for humans to live in because of the radiation that is found there. And so, the although the planet tends to naturally have brown zones, as human beings, we've created what are called dead zones. Now we come to rainforests, which are half of their original size and tend continue to shrink. The concern with rainforests is that they are the lungs that tend to produce a lot of oxygen. And a challenge that happened in 2019 is that the Amazon jungle was actually set on fire. And we have since heard through the media, some outlets in the media, that the president of Brazil was the one that actually was promoting the burning of the Amazon so that they could clear land for raising of cattle, which is a animal that we high income nations tend to have a great craving for. And so when you remove the carbon dioxide from the oxygen by these plants, it creates a more livable environment for our human beings. But when we remove the plants, then the capacity to remove that carbon is reduced. And sometimes it's difficult to understand that we human beings produce carbon dioxide, but we need oxygen to survive. And plants, they remove the carbon dioxide because that's what they need, and they produce the oxygen that we need to survive. And so we come to garbage. This is what ends up in landfills or gets burned. So it's all of the things that we throw out. Now, in our culture, we tend to be encouraged to consume. We are usually told that consumption is what will make us happy. Consumptions will make us, consuming products will make us popular. And but we're never asked to think about what happens when all of these things that we buy, where they may end up. And it tends to end up either in a big hole, or before it gets put in the hole, it gets burned up. And when it gets burned up, it actually produces pollution in the air. And it tends to accumulate pretty much like cigarette smoke in our bodies. And so we tend to forget that we live inside a bottle. Anything that we do into our environment, we will eventually end up either drinking it, eating it, or inhaling it. And so it's important to understand that we live inside of a closed system. And thus we come to toxic and radioactive waste. We tend to use nuclear energy to power our homes for us to live healthy and to live comfortably and to basically have all the comforts of life. However, what ends up happening is that we use this nuclear energy and we produce nuclear waste. And some of this waste tends to last for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so it's very dangerous for humans. Although we put it in government monitored sites, they are actually not always very safe. We were told in 2010 that there was a poster child of a building where that was housing nuclear waste. And we were told that this building located in Fukushima, Japan, was the next generation of buildings that would be able to safely house nuclear waste. However, they had an earthquake in 2010, and when that happened, the building actually burst into flames. And so when the population was trying to put out the flames, they were putting out a lot of water. They were throwing in a lot of water into the building, and it destabilized the building more. It caused other earthquakes. And the biggest problem was that the water then washed into the ocean. And so water that is radioactive then landed in the ocean, and those ocean currents tend to carry all of this all over the planet. And so we lead now to uh, oil spills, or we continue now with oil spills. In 2010, there was a event that happened in the Gulf of Mexico where record numbers of oil were spilled because of an explosion of an oil rig. And during the Obama administration, uh, we did something that was very troubling, in that we spilled Corexit into the oil spill because it was a public relations nightmare for British Petroleum. And instead of waiting for the natural enzymes in the ocean to take down the oil or to consume the oil, the Obama administration decided to throw Corexit into the oil. And there are concerns that it's a chemical that actually causes cancer and brain tumors. And it was a chemical that was outlawed or not legal in Europe, and yet we threw it in record amounts. And so we come to then what's called a catch 22, the uh, the fact that the more complex a society's technology, so the more we have televisions in every room, computers, iPads, heating and central air, the more the society's use and complexity of technology, the greater then is its capacity to alter the natural environment. Climate change used to be called global warming. It was changed to climate change because people were confused about why at certain times of the year the weather was very cold. And so, to explain this, the terminology was changed to climate change. And this is the shifting in temperature that is getting warmer and warmer, and is actually due to human capacity or human activity. And in 2007, over 2,000 scientists worldwide came together and into what's called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they were the ones that said that yes, the temperature is increasing for the planet, and it is directly linked to human activity. And so climate change then is the extreme weather patterns that will occur due to this increase in temperature. So hot will get hotter, wet will get wetter, cold will get colder, and dry will get drier. Finally, we end with environmental racism. I had mentioned that the United States has exploded nuclear bombs in the Indian Native American reservations. They did it when they were testing these bombs. And so, what ended up happening is that the indigenous people then face the burden of living in these areas that are highly toxic, that have nuclear waste. And that's one example. There are many, many examples of environmental racism in our culture.